Hi, I'm Sam Brager with Utah Lake Commission. We're bummed we couldn't have you at the lake this year for the field trips, so we made them virtual. In these videos, you'll learn about all kinds of things. So I want to give you a little bit of background on the field trips first. The Utah Lake field trips, they have been going on for over a decade now. And honestly, it's all thanks to the amazing partners that we have. Many government agencies, universities, and other organizations who volunteer their time to teach these fourth graders these amazing topics about Utah Lake. Now, the way it works is there's actually curriculum that is taught by teachers in the public schools. And so we have 10 lessons that hit on a variety of topics, anywhere from the Utah Lake Monster down to the history of the lake, to the water quality, water conservation, these various topics. And the teachers can teach those lessons, and then once they teach those lessons, they qualify to then possibly attend these field trips. The field trips have 2 locations and 2 dates. We do the spring field trips at Utah Lake State Park in Provo, and that's 4 days. So a lot more students attend that. We typically have about 1,400 students and teachers and chaperones all there to attend. And then we have a fall field trip as well. That's over in Saratoga Springs at their city marina in the fall. That one's only 2 days, but it caters, to the opposite side of the lake so that we can have 2 locations for teachers to visit to make it as easy as possible for them to have that great experience with the kids can spend a day at the lake. The next thing I want to share with you is some facts about the lake. So to do that, I've got a map that I want you to see. And so, hold up there. You guys are too far away. Come a little bit closer. Oh, okay. That's much better. You're a little bit closer now. So what I wanted to talk to you about is a few facts about the lake. And I got this awesome map behind me. Yes, I know there are some kind of ugly green looking patches around on my map. Those are from some satellite pictures when there was algae. It's funny, when most people think of Utah Lake, they think of something like this, right? The map. They think of something gross. But they don't think of something like this. A really beautiful picture of the lake, right? So what I'm hoping today is kind of give you a little background, help you learn to love the lake and see it and think of that beautiful image instead of this ugly map, right? So first fact for you. How tall, I shouldn't say. How long do you think Utah Lake is? All the way from up here until down here in the south. Any ideas? 5 miles, is that what you say? Keep going, up, higher, more. 25 miles about. When you reach all the way up here near the mouth of the Jordan River, all the way down to Goshen Bay is about 25 miles. How about how wide? I gave you a hint, miles, we're talking big, right? From Provo Bay all the way across, 12 to 13 miles wide. Now keep in mind, that's pretty big. 25 miles, that's like driving from Utah Lake State Park here in Provo all the way up to Heber. And the width, 12 to 13 miles, that'll get you from the state park to about halfway through Provo Canyon. So we're talking about some really big distances here. What about average depth? How deep do you think Utah Lake is? I know some of you know that it's pretty shallow, actually. When Utah Lake is full, when it has the most water it can take on, it's only about 9 to 10 feet deep on average. Now to help you understand, I'm about 6 feet tall. This room we're in, about 9.5 feet. So I'm basically standing in a room that's as deep as Utah Lake when it's full. So it's pretty crazy just how shallow Utah Lake is. Now, how much water can it hold, right? It's huge. I mean, we're talking about 95,000 acres of surface area. So Utah Lake, when it's full, can hold 870,000 acre feet of water. Now, some of you are probably asking, what's an acre foot? 1 acre foot is enough water to cover an acre of land in 1 foot, right? Hence the name acre foot, okay? So 1 acre foot is equal to 325,851 gallons of water. Can you imagine just how much water that is? 325,851 gallons. How long do you think it takes you to drink a gallon of milk? Imagine that, 325,000 gallons of milk. Now that's just 1 acre foot. 870,000 acre feet? How many gallons do you think that is? 870,000 acre feet is 293,490,370,000 gallons. So basically we're talking about a little over 280 billion gallons of water. That is enough to cover the entire city of Provo in 30 feet of water. Last but not least of the facts I want to share with you is how many access points there are at Utah Lake. A public access point is where anybody in the public can come and have a good time at the lake. So it's a really big lake, right? 27 public access points, and they range from down here south of Saratoga. There's a whole bunch along the populated section of the lake and some more down here, but 27, 5 of which are public marinas where you can launch a boat. The rest are things like trail access, beaches, and what we like to call sportsman's access, which means they're primarily used for hunting and fishing. All right, you guys, 2 cool things I want to tell you about the history of Utah Lake. 1, did you know there was once a boxing match held at the bottom of Utah Lake? No, it's true, I promise. It really did happen. Back in the 1930s, during what was called the Dust Bowl era, and that's where a lot of water sources dried up, agriculture was struggling, a lot of dust in the air, right? I'm sure you guys are learning about it in school. In the 1930s, Utah Lake almost dried up. It's the lowest it's probably ever recorded. 2 guys, Andy Anderson and Dave Williamson, went out into the middle of Utah Lake and staged a mock boxing fight out in what would be the center of Utah Lake. Now, I don't think anybody got hurt, but it's kind of a cool story that somebody could say, did you know there was a boxing match at the bottom of Utah Lake? The second thing I want to tell you about is a story about a boat. It was called the USS Showboat. Did you know that there was a USS Showboat at Utah Lake? Probably not. This is something you can learn about. There's an online video called Utah Lake Legacy, which I'll link to for you guys. And that talks all about the history of the lake. At one time on Utah Lake, the USS Showboat was built by 2 partners. Now this boat was pretty big, 30 or so feet wide by about 90 feet long, and it could float in as little water as 14 inches. That's not much, and not many boats can go on that little bit of water these days. Now the more incredible thing is, yes, this boat was 30 feet by 90 feet, functioned in about 14 inches of water, but the point was to take people out on Utah Lake for tours. They used to actually go out, and there was an orchestra, a kitchen, restrooms, a dance floor, a stage. Upwards of 200 people would be on this boat at one time, out on Utah Lake, having a great time, dancing, singing, eating food. A really cool story. In fact, I'm going to put in a video clip here so you guys can see just a little bit more about that boat.
During the resort heyday of the early 20th century, excursion boats such as the SS Showboat and Renon W set sail, taking passengers around to all of the lake resorts, out for a romantic dinner party cruise, or to dance to the orchestra on board.
It had a stage at one end of the boat and a kitchen and restrooms, and people would perform on the stage different vaudeville acts and so forth for the paying customers. And then they had large dances on the boat. Sometimes they had over 200 people on that boat, and it was a very nominal fee. You could go down, ride the boat, take your loved one out for a ride under the starry skies above Utah Lake, and dance away the evening for like 50 cents, something in that area. There wasn't very much entertainment in Provo at the time. We had 2 or 3 motion picture theaters and several bars, and that was about it. So Smith and Strong cashed in on what was a need for entertainment.
Now that we've covered some history at Utah Lake, I want to talk to you about stuff you can do there today, currently, and that's recreation. Utah Lake has so many different recreation opportunities. There's all kinds of things that you can do all seasons of the year, spring, summer, winter, and fall. There's things like water sports, the typical boating, water skiing, jet skiing, wakeboarding, kayaking, canoeing, paddleboarding. Sailing is immensely popular at Utah Lake. There's all kinds of things to do out on the water. There's also other kinds of recreation you can do there, like bird watching is extremely popular. Over 200 species of birds at Utah Lake that you could go see down there. Other activities like using the trails or camping at some of the areas there that's allowed. Angling and hunting are also immensely popular at Utah Lake. Tons of people like to go down and just spend time along the shoreline, utilizing the beaches that are there. These 2 pictures behind me are great examples of recreation at the lake. Over here, we have one that's of fishing. This is during one of the, I think, the walleye or white bass run, and there are tons of anglers out there catching fish to their heart's content. Another activity that's popular at Utah Lake, not everybody thinks of, powered paragliding. Especially up in the Vineyard shoreline area where there's those nice open expanses. Powered paragliders love being at Utah Lake too. And there's all kinds of recreation at Utah Lake. There's even several clubs. There's a photography club, a sailing club. There's all kinds of organizations and people who want to spend time at Utah Lake. And we love helping them have a great time down there. Another topic we want to hit on is algae at Utah Lake. That's a big question. People have lots of questions about algae. And there's 3 things that we would have you know about algae at Utah Lake. 1, understand what an advisory means. Sometimes there are closures at certain marinas, or even there's been one lake-wide before. But more often than not, it's what's called a warning advisory, and that's not quite as dangerous. During a warning advisory, they recommend certain things. 1, they recommend you don't swim or water ski. Those are activities that are going to get you in the water for long periods of time or accidentally ingesting water. I haven't water skied since I was a kid. If I went water skiing, I'd probably be swallowing a lot of water. The second recommendation is if you're going to go out boating or sailing or whatever, don't go where there's scum on the water. And that's pretty easy to be able to see and avoid, but you can still go out. Notice it says when boating, not if boating. The other couple recommendations are things like don't let your livestock or pets go in the water. Don't drink the water yourself. Please don't drink lake water anywhere, any lake water, river water. You should never be drinking that water. We want to make sure that you stay out of that. And the last recommendation is for fishing. Fishing is something you can still do during a warning advisory for algae blooms. The only recommendation is if you're going to eat it, that you discard the guts and you clean it well. And that's another great common sense tactic, that you should discard the guts and clean your fish well before you eat it. The second thing that we tell people about algae blooms is know where they are. So oftentimes when you hear about a bloom, if you saw a news story or heard something online or a neighbor told you, you hear algae bloom and bam, the lake's closed, you can't do anything, you're never able to go out there. Well, remember what we said, what an advisory means, and know where it is. Algae blooms can be limited to just one area of the lake. So there could be one marina that's being affected. In 2019, the first algae bloom we had affected the Saratoga Springs City Marina, also known as the Pelican Bay Marina. That is one marina on the lake, and that accounts for, I think it's less than 0.1% of the surface area of Utah Lake that was actually impacted. So make sure you know where a bloom is. The third thing we tell people about algae blooms is that we're doing something about it. And by that, the State Division of Water Quality and the Utah Lake Commission are partnered on a study. We're studying the water quality and what can be done about algae blooms and how we can reduce the nutrients that algae feed on in the lake. We're also testing out some algae treatment ideas. Summer of 2020 is our goal for testing out a couple marinas and a couple technologies that have been proposed in order to try and help with algae blooms. So that in the future, maybe we could spot treat certain areas that might be prone to algae blooms. There is a lot of work being done to help with algae blooms, but with this information, our hope is that you can still go out and recreate safely and have a good time at Utah Lake. So if you want to go kayaking or canoeing, if there is a bloom on, find out where it is and go to somewhere else on the lake where it isn't. If it's saying it's down in Provo Bay, that's one small percentage of the surface area of the lake. It's something like 10% or less. So head over to an area that doesn't have an algae bloom advisory and you're good to go. You can still have a great time down at Utah Lake recreating down there. We want to share with you one specific story about recreation that's very unique, and that's the story of a triathlete. Her name's Erica Wild, and she did a triathlon across Utah Lake. Now keep in mind what I just said, a triathlon across Utah Lake. Erica reached out to us, the Utah Lake Commission, a couple years back, and she said, I'm a local triathlete. Oh. Do you guys know what a triathlete is? Or a triathlon? That's right. A triathlon is a race where there's 3 kinds of events. Usually it's swimming, cycling, and running, right? So keep that in mind, swimming, cycling, running, okay? Well, Erica is a triathlete, which is somebody who does triathlons. So Erica grew up in Springville, loves Utah Lake, and she decided one day that she wanted to do a triathlon across Utah Lake. Now think about that for a second. Swimming, cycling, running. Swimming across the lake, possible. Water, right? You can swim. It's really big though. Cycling and running. So Erica, a couple of years back, she gets with some friends and they swim across Utah Lake. Now they were smart, they were safe, took a boat, life jackets, the whole shindig just to make sure they were safe. but they swam the narrowest part of Utah Lake, which is 5 miles across. That's crazy. Can you imagine if they did the full 13 from Provo Bay across to the west side? That's so big. But they did the 5 miles across. Then what's left? She's got cycling, she's got running. Very good. Well, how is she going to get across the lake? When it freezes over. I know, crazy, right? If you ever played out on ice, you got to be careful. It's, a lot of fun, but you want to make sure you're being safe. So a couple years pass, and Erica decides to cycle across Utah Lake. Does she cycle first or does she run? Next, after she swam, she's got cycling and running. So next she chose to run while it was frozen. Now, something's risky, like I said, you got to be careful, but she ran all the way across 5 miles and back, so 10 miles across Utah Lake when it was frozen. Can you imagine? And last, cycling. Now, the next couple of winters didn't really work out for her. It took some time. The ice was melting. It wasn't safe. Finally, time comes, right? This is the winter, I think it was of 2017. And she's wanting to cycle across using fat tire bikes. Those are those really big fat tires on the bikes that are really good for ice. She's looking at the weather. She's wanting to go. I think it was on like a Wednesday, and her friends were like, we can't really go. It's the middle of the week. Can't get work off. Let's just wait till the weekend. Erica was thinking that might not work. The weather wasn't going to allow for it. She wanted to go and not miss the chance again to be able to finish her triathlon. So she found a couple other friends to go with her. Again, wanted to be safe, wanted to have some fun. And they biked all the way across Utah Lake. So cool they were able to accomplish that. If she'd waited till Saturday, she found out the weather changed and the ice was no longer safe. So she was able to swim, bike, and run across Utah Lake. Now, why do I share that story? Yeah, it's a really cool story. Don't get me wrong, and I love talking about it. In fact, we're going to have her on our podcast sometime soon to talk more about it. The reason we share that story about Erica is because it's a great example of utilizing Utah Lake for all of its recreational resources. Like I talked about earlier, there's tons of recreation opportunities at Utah Lake. Whether it's water sports, kayaking, canoeing, paddleboarding, boating, sailing, wakeboarding, water skiing, jet skiing, all that stuff, or it's stuff on land, using the trails, fishing, hunting, using all the opportunities that are out there is what we want people to do at Utah Lake. It's why the Utah Lake Commission organizes these field trips and other educational events and recreation programs, is we think of amazing pictures like these. We think of Utah Lake for all of its potential and the beauty it has. And we want you guys to have that good of an experience too. So if you haven't been to Utah Lake to visit yet, go check it out. Have a good time down there, find out a new hobby, and learn to love Utah Lake, just like Erica. Thanks so much for listening into the presentation, you guys. We hope that you enjoy all the other field trip videos that we've created. And as always, if you want to learn more about Utah Lake, visit utahlakecommission.org.